Tell me a funny story about Jim, because he told me one off the record. So now that we're on the record, give me your best Jim Johnson story.
Jim, how far down this road do we want to go? Jim also was. When we arrived in Sierra Leone, the place was devastated. 90% of the country was destroyed. Can you imagine that? 90% of the country. There was no running water, no electricity. If you got any water at all, it would kill you, so you avoided it. All of our electricity was generator driven. And so we initially when we got there, we found a mansion called Seaview, which just down the street from the Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. It had 30-foot walls, concertina wire, blast gates. It had the mansion itself. The walls were like 2 feet thick. Bulletproof glass on the walls. There were still bullet holes on the side of the wall and in the glass. So we replaced all those. So that was the actual office of the prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone for the first year, as we began to build the compound and stuff for what would eventually be the court itself. And we were like bakers. The first floor and the bottom floor was the office of the prosecutor, and 6 of us lived upstairs on the second floor, kind of over the shop, like bakers. We would go down early in the morning and start baking our cinnamon rolls. But it was kind of an interesting thing. Once the court compound was actually ready to go, we moved there, and then we just stayed and expanded a little bit. And so 6 of us lived in Seaview, and Jim was one of the senior people that lived with us. It was actually not a bad place to live. So I just want to put that in context. So Jim was my roommate for basically 3 years. So I know a lot about Jim Johnson. No, but we had some crazy times because there was nothing there. Literally, there was a place where you lived, and there was a place where you worked, and there was nothing else. We always had this joke of, when we came to work, we would go, "Hey, how was your weekend? Did you go down? Did you go down to the Freetown Mall? And did you see any movies?" We used to watch movies until we finally got a television and set up a satellite TV system about 1.5 years into it all. We used to watch TV. We'd all gather around on a laptop, and they were there. That was a new concept in those days. It was 2002, 2003. Most of the you remember the desktops, and it was like, a 200-pound plastic beast sitting there, and it was the greatest thing we ever seen, and they'll never invent anything better, right? Well, the laptops are coming in, so we had laptops, and so there's 6 of us or 5 of us, we'd all gather around, put a CD in, and we'd watch a movie. That was on Saturday night, that was our one form of entertainment throughout all of that. So,
what was the name of that bar that you guys would hang out at?
Mamba Point. Again, like I said, there was nothing that existed, but there was a couple of international places. And what do I mean by that? Those are places that cater to internationals who are living or working there. And, working there. Nobody went to live in Sierra Leone. I think there was one tourist that came to Sierra Leone the entire 3 years I was there. The tourist industry just isn't there. So you go to an international. If you've traveled before in third world countries, you have to be careful where you eat, or could be a fatal move for many reasons. So Mamba Point was a place where when you went there to have a Jack Daniels on the rocks were frozen bottled water. See where I'm going with this? If they just turn on the tap and froze some ice cubes, the damn things will kill you, or you'll get parasites or dysentery for the next month. So you always had to make sure, and they catered to international. So anytime the word got out that they weren't, it would be fatal to the business. So Mamba Point, the first meal I ever had in Sierra Leone, and I'm not talking a place that is gone. The place is devastated. there's still dead bodies and bushes and vultures flying around. But there's this place called Mamba Point, owned by two Lebanese brothers. They got two restaurants, one in Mamba Point, which the original Mamba Point in Monrovia, and the Mamba Point in Freetown. They're Lebanese brothers, Ziad and Chowie, right, Jim? And they made the best damn pizza I've ever had in my life. The first meal I ever had in Sierra Leone, in this hell on earth, the worst place in the world to live at the time, according to the United Nations. I had one of the best damn pizzas I've ever had. It's called the Boston Special. And they put everything on it, and I was introduced to Star Beer. Believe it or not, they had a friggin' brewery. And it was great lager. And, for what? How much was it? 25 cents or something? Yeah, I mean, yeah. So anyway, here I am sitting, and I'm numb. I've just traveled. I've just left my family for the next 3 years. I'm just numb at so many levels. And I'm sitting here munching on the best damn pizza I ever had and a cold beer. So we would do that. Absolutely. The ground nuts. They have a wonderful, it's like a peanut. It's a small, like a Spanish peanut, and very common throughout the West Africa. And so we all got hooked on those ground nuts that we would have. We'd sit down at Mamba Point, and they knew who we were, and the Star Beer would be put on your place, and the ground nuts and stuff. And I'm stalling because I'm trying to think something funny about Jim. I never answered the question. I'll figure it out. Jim's kind of a quiet guy and kind of a steady guy, so that's why I brought him to Sierra Leone.
He drove you up here tonight. You want to get back. I get it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, if you see me walking back to Jamestown, it didn't work. But again, Mamba Point was a special place because, again, one of the most important things as my team began to arrive to start doing their important mission was try to keep them psychologically balanced. I mean, we were up to our elbows in blood, and the stress, the strains was both conscious and subconscious. And every Friday night, we would all assemble at Mamba Point to have pizza and beer, or whatever else you wanted. But the point is that it was and I usually tried to buy, if I was there, tried to buy the first round, so to speak. And the rule was you don't talk business. Because, you live and breathe this stuff for, when we first got there, we worked 7 days a week. And when we came back from Christmas of January of 2000, I got there in August of 2001. When we came back or 2002, and then when we came back in January 2003, I notched it back to 6 days a week because we were about to put the hammer down in Operation Justice and arrest everybody. And then once we had everybody arrested, detained, and we began our pretrial process, I notched it back to 5 days. But I'll be honest with you, we all work 6 days a week. Where are we going this weekend? It's just they had beautiful beaches, and I'm not a beach guy. I mean, I don't want to lay out because I'll roll over and hit a needle that washed up from the water. One of the things we found that what Europe and the United States likes to do is like to take these garbage barges and go to third world countries and dump their garbage just off the the territorial waters of West African countries, and so all this medical waste would wash up on the beaches. So as if there was nothing else this poor country had, and they don't pick up the garbage. There's probably 40 to 50 years of garbage in the streets, so it's just vermin, rats, what have you, everywhere. And I remember when we finally got our computers. Dell computers. They arrived in a UN truck after finally forcing the UN to give them to us because they'd been there for about a month, but the Secretary General's representative didn't like the court, so he wasn't going to comply with helping us. And so I had to call the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, and said, look, I'm about to arrest your representative here for obstruction of justice. So we have two choices. Give us what we need, or I'm going to put the hammer down. So he got called to the UN, counseled, and we got our computers. And so they arrive in this big UN truck, and we're pleased. And so we start unloading but there's all these boxes. Well, nothing gets thrown away or wasted in Sierra Leone. And so we got rid of we got our boxes, we put them outside Seaview, the mansion. And we distributed these boxes to the people of Sierra Leone where they use them as houses. I mean, the roofs, because it's actually if you look at it, it's actually not a bad choreograph, boxes. And so they would use them to put on top of as roofs to their huts, or flooring for their houses. A house probably a fifth the size of this room, and there'd be a family of 15 in these things. No water, no electricity. They would burn everything. Because to get heat, they burn everything, and so the entire country is just a haze. I like to call it like a living entity, where you move through you can feel the air as it wraps around you, and it's just filled with hydrocarbons, disease, the smell of death, everything. And so you lived and breathed and tasted all of this all of the time. But it was fascinating to see as we were driving down the street from Seaview, all of our computer boxes starting to become construction pieces until they ran out. But that is what it is.
You are mandated by the United Nations Security Council to prosecute those who bore the greatest responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity stemming from the 10-year-long civil war in Sierra Leone during the 1990s. And as a result, you actually executed 13 indictments, including the first African head of state ever to be indicted for international crimes, President Charles Taylor of Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
Who was he and what was he like?
Well, he was he was an American as well, and he went to college in Massachusetts. He was born in Liberia and stuff, but he spent quite a bit of time in Massachusetts. He went to college there. What was the college, Jim? Was it Wesley College?
David, do you remember?
Jim? No, it's funny. What's that?
Babson?
No, it started with a W, and I all of a sudden I blanked on it. But anyway, went to college in Massachusetts, used to pump gas, typical kind of college student. Got a degree in business, went back to Liberia, was hired to be in the comptroller's office, where what comptrollers do, but he got in trouble. They couldn't account for $90,000 or so, and he fled back to the United States, where he was promptly arrested, or they sent out an extradition notice, and so he was put in prison waiting his extradition, and he was put in a prison that had never been escaped. But for some reason, Charles Taylor escaped. And at the end of the day, I'll just tell you exactly what was once top secret. It's not anymore. But Charles Taylor was released by the Central Intelligence Agency. Basically walked out the prison, and they turned him, saying, look, we're going to send you back to West Africa, and you're going to be our man. And if by chance and we'd like for you we don't like the guy that's currently running Liberia, and so we'd like for you to go back for a considerable amount of money to make that happen. Well, he did, but he stopped by Muammar Gaddafi's terrorist camps that he was running over in the 1990s or 1980s, and got in a cahoots with Blaise Compaoré, who would eventually become the president of Burkina Faso, Fodi Sanko, who was the head of the Revolutionary United Front, and Muammar Gaddafi was building a cadre of individuals who would go down into West Africa and foment rebellion to take over these countries and then they would be a fiefdom to Muammar Gaddafi, who had declared he wants to be the Emperor of Africa. And you can Google this. And he declared that he wanted to make Tripoli in Libya the capital of Africa. And he was using West Africa as a test bed to see how he would do. So he took the surrogates went down into these countries. Blaise Compaoré took over Burkina Faso and became president. Charles Taylor fomented a rebellion, and over a couple of years eventually became the president of Liberia in 1996, et cetera, et cetera. Fodi Sanko trained, worked with Charles Taylor in and around Sierra Leone. Fodi Sanko, head of the RUF, and in March of 1991 they invaded Sierra Leone. So Charles Taylor, about all 5'4" of him, articulate, incredible speaker, very charismatic, came to power, but of course throughout all this time he had been along with Muammar Gaddafi and Blaise Compaoré, supported the beginning of the rebellion back in March of 1991. And so on the eastern portion of Sierra Leone, they invaded from Liberia with the objection, with Libyan special forces, Liberian forces, the Revolution United Front. Their objective was immediately to go and seize the diamond fields in the Kailahun district, which is in the northeastern portion of Sierra Leone. Now, I'll digress here because this is fascinating. I didn't know this until I really began getting ready to go over to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is one of the few places on earth that the gem quality diamonds are alluvial, which means they leach to the surface. You dig 5-10 feet down and you're in gem quality diamonds. Yeah, talk about thinking, wow, why isn't Sierra Leone like Las Vegas now? You would think that with all those diamonds that it would be just it'd be a wash in cash. That's another story. So they immediately headed towards and seized that portion of Sierra Leone as kind of their base to operate and take over all of Sierra Leone. The objective in what we call the West African Joint Criminal Enterprise was to take over Burkina Faso, Liberia. They'd done that. Sierra Leone was next, and then moving east and west, taking over the various countries along the Atlantic there, and would then be part of Muammar Gaddafi's fiefdom. But so they had to go to and get the diamonds so they could use it to kind of help finance this rebellion. This is where the term blood diamond comes from. They're not bloody, they're just used to buy guns that kill people. And so they would mine the diamonds, move them through Monrovia, Charles Taylor, moved them up to Ibrahim Ba in Burkina Faso, who then facilitated the movement of diamonds for cash for guns from the newly formed countries of the old Warsaw Pact. And they had, the Soviet army all of a sudden just gave up all their weapons. Well, where did all those weapons go? Into gun runners and diamond dealers. And so they would go up into Eastern Europe, the Lord of War, Vladimir Lenin and Victor Bout, and they would pay cash for AK-47s and all that. And then they would be shipped back down to Burkina Faso, to Ibrahim Ba, who would then ship them down to Monrovia and then west into Sierra Leone, and then they would sustain their banks. It was diamonds, guns, and cash. That's the West African Joint Criminal Enterprise, which is the blood diamond story, and we broke that up. So Charles Taylor is, this guy. He's now gaining power and stature. He's becoming very powerful. One of the most powerful warlords in Africa, all of Africa. The fascinating thing about him, though, was that he could be whatever you wanted to be. He could walk through that door right now, come in a very nice suit, or he would know that what you're wearing. So he would come in nicely dressed, but he would be dressed like you. He was a chameleon. He would be whatever you wanted him to be. If this was if this was like if this was a Baptist group, he'd be a Baptist. If this was a Jewish group, he'd be a Jewish group. He would be a Jew. If this was Muslim, he'd be a Muslim. He'd change to be whatever you want him to be. It was really fascinating, and he bamboozled some serious people here throughout the 1990s. And Jimmy Carter visited him, and they were both on their knees praying in his executive mansion. And Jimmy Carter had high praise for him. This man is a man of God. You can hear machetes whacking away and guns going off in the background. Jesse Jackson and Jimmy, help me with this, but we stumbled over the fact, if you remember, and you can Google this as well, Jesse Jackson, who was President Clinton's special representative in West Africa, made this declaration that as he was coming out of the executive mansion after spending some time with Charles Taylor in a meeting, declared that Charles Taylor is the Nelson Mandela of West Africa. And of course, Nelson Mandela had just turned South Africa from a Nazi state into a beacon of hope, at least for the time. But sadly, it's going the other direction now. But at the time, so that's quite a statement for him to make, and So why did he say something like that? Well, we kind of, as we were doing our investigation and finding out, we kind of found out that he gave Jesse Jackson a big fat diamond. And so, if you give me a big fat diamond, I'll call you the Nelson Mandela of Chautauqua County, all right? But you get where I'm going. Found out, hey, Pat Robinson, 700 Club, anybody watch that?
Not anymore.
Well, you're definitely not going to do it again. Though I don't know where Pat Robertson is now, because is he still around? Hey, owned a gold diamond with Charles Taylor in Liberia. Isn't that amazing? And he was in business with Charles Taylor. Now, it wasn't my mandate, and maybe we can have Jim come up and we can talk about Naomi Campbell and diamonds and Mia Farrow and all that stuff. But I passed it when I went to visit Bob Mueller, who was then the FBI director. We found a lot of things as we began to rumble around this godless part of the world. We also found, remember the tragic story in 1998 where Al Qaeda blew up the American embassies in both in Kenya, Nairobi, and in Tanzania and Arusha. Well, where'd those guys go? Monrovia, Liberia. Several of them. Well, because they never could find them. Well, we found them. We didn't mean to, but we did. And so that kind of data, that kind of stuff, it was outside my mandate. I mean, so we would turn it over to the appropriate country that had a jurisdiction or an interest in that. I mean, we found some things and worked with MI6. It wasn't James Bond. And also, I personally flew this kind of stuff when I would fly back officially. When I'd go to the UN, I'd make a circuit, because since I was across the pond, I'd kill like 1,000 birds with one stone. And yeah, I would spend the weekend at home, But the point is that I'd go down and I'd go to Canada, Ottawa. Canadians were great supporters of the court. I'd go to the UN, do my thing there, drop down to Washington, brief the various congressional committees, the State Department, what have you. But then, if I had something of interest to the United States from a criminal point of view, I'd go visit Bob Mueller and just hand it to him and say, look, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I want to give this to you because it's not my jurisdiction. And he was pleasant and appreciated it. And they went and got him. It took all of a sudden, about 2 years later, they raided various places. They started following him and took down about half of them for what they had done to those embassies. A lot of backstory, but again, these types of situations, atrocities, they're like kaleidoscopes, and there's like 1,000 levels of all of it. It's not just we go in, prosecute bad guys, and go home. It is all about all kinds of things. It's political, it's diplomatic, it's cultural, it's practical. You've got gun runners, diamond dealers, various other countries, spies, everybody working with, for, against you, kind of with you and against you, trying to help you, trying to not help you. All of this is a boiling pot of everything, and yet you have to continue with your strategic plan, you have to continue with your prosecution strategy and work your way through this murky part of the world where most people want you to fail. And so as you swim through those murky waters, you always have to remind yourself that, despite all of whatever you're going through, malaria, cholera, typhoid, parasites, etc., we're here to bring justice to a ruined people to the tune of on or around 1.2 million human beings, murdered, raped, maimed, and mutilated. And so that's what we did. And I remember standing in a place called Savage Waters in September of 2002 with Alan White, our chief of investigations, and this was kind of our first crime scene. We were putting up the tape. During the Civil War, they would force people, chain people together and move them up into the Kylahoon district, where remember they went to seize the diamonds, and they would chain people to pits and just work them to death. You know, they'd last about a week, and then they'd throw their bodies in this place called Savage Waters. So we don't know how many human beings were in there, but I remember standing at the edge of this thing, you know, kind of up to my knees in human bones, and I'm turning to Al, and I said, you know, and you've heard me say this, we're going to get these bastards. You know, and you have to kind of start building a righteous fury, because you know your weight is dropping, you're away from home, all we've got is ourselves. There's every single disease you could ever get in the world. There's black cobras. There are rats the size of small dogs. And there are things, you know, the ones I like, I don't remember the name of them, Jim, but the snakes that get in the trees and like to drop down on you. No, the black, yeah, that's right, the black mamba. And there was a nice little one, a viper that was kind of greenish that would do the same kind of thing. The cobras were at least in your face. You had a chance to run. You know, it's a humbling experience. You know, have anybody ever looked at ever be on the other end of this? Yeah, I tell you, it only happened to me once, and it happened in the backyard of Seaview. I was out after we had taken down everybody and won the arrest operation. We kind of sealed ourselves off for about a couple days just to see what the reaction of the country is. So we couldn't leave our compound. We worked, but we never left Seaview. And you know, we had 30-foot walls and stuff and blast doors and stuff. So we kind of closed the gates just to kind of see where the dust would settle, and it settled very well. So I would get up in the morning. The compound was about a mile, about 1.5 acres. So we had kind of a path in the garden in the back. So I was running 1,000 times around this path. And yeah, it was about 6 in the morning, and I came around and
Did you lose your stride?
no, I think I shat myself. I don't remember, but again, this was just daily life in Sierra Leone. Every day, 7 days a week. It was, you know, you would go there were places that looked like I think we're all Star Warriors here. We all saw in 1976, the first one where, remember see the bar in Tatooine? You know, yeah, you know, doot, 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 and he walks up to the bar and the creature looks at him and goes, I don't like you. You know, it's kind of like that world. It was Mad Max Thunderdome, you know, the original one, you know, with Mel Gibson. It was crazy, wild things. People were jury rigging machines and stuff because there's no parts. There's no supermarkets. There's nothing. You bartered. Hey, Jim and I always had this joke. For some reason, there was a bank somewhere close to downtown where it looked like a cash machine. Remember that, Jim? And our joke is that you would put your bank card into the slot, and there was a guy at the other end. He'd take your card, and then he would ask you how much money you would like. Yeah, and he'd put it through the thing. I mean, there was no banks. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple kind of commercial banks, but it's not like what we do here. You know, honey, I need $100. You brought your financial system when you came to Freetown with you, money belts and stuff like that. And fortunately at Seaview, we had, for some reason, there was a safe, an old safe in one of the rooms. Actually, it was outside of your room, wasn't it, Jim? Yeah. It was a closet in your room. Yeah. That's right. Of course, we couldn't spin the dial, but it had a place where you could put a lock, so we locked it, and we would put those of us that lived in Seaview, we put our money in an envelope, put our name on it, and just put it in the safe. But you know, we're looking at $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 because you know that's what you went out. If I went out to Mamba Point to get a pizza and a beer or buy it for the team, you know, it has to be cash. It's not put it on your. In fact, you don't want to put it on any card because you know within probably a day it would be destroyed, what have you. We put our weapons in there and all that stuff. So keep everything safe, what have you. But so that was just daily life. And now that we're talking about daily life, things like Water, I kind of alluded to the fact that the water coming out of the faucet, if you had water, was deadly. So you never opened your mouth. One of the greatest things coming back to Europe, if you're going up to Europe or getting home, is to take a shower and you could open your damn mouth. That was great. You know, and lights, real lights. Because, you know, particularly the first year we were there, generated power is just slightly, you're at about 75%. And then you go and we'd fly one of 2 flights out of Sierra Leone per week, the international flights. You'd always landed in Brussels at 5 in the morning. And all the normal lights would be on, and it would literally hurt your eyes. But then we'd all head to the men's room and just play with the water. You know, oh my, hey, go ahead, flush the toilet. Yeah, you could always tell somebody from the Special Corps for Sierra Leone because they're playing with the water in the toilet because it's cleaner than the water anywhere in Sierra Leone. I'm being facetious, but the point was, then we go have a meal, you know, like bacon and eggs. It was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. So, you know, you can eat all that kind of thing. We're like animals. It's like we're almost feral in our outlook on life. And I'm being, again, a little facetious, but the point is that small things like that. Toothbrushes. Don't you brush your teeth with that water coming out of that faucet? So you'd forget. You know, you're getting ready to go to bed, but we always had cases and cases of bottled water that we'd buy from the UNPX every week. And each of us had a case of bottled water in our rooms too, so we could wash our hands, brush our teeth, and, you know, rinse off our toothbrush. And you probably do this when you go maybe to third world countries. If you don't, I recommend that you do. And if you forget, because it's a habit, you know, you take out your toothbrush, turn on the faucet and stick your toothbrush in. And I went through like a dozen toothbrushes the first 2 weeks I was there because I kept forgetting. And it's useless. Once it gets in that water, it's done. You just throw it away, get another one. And finally you get to the point where you remember and move on from there. I'm wandering away, but Greg said we're just going to make this what it was really like, the taste, the touch, the smell, and I hope it's more interesting to you. You can certainly read about what Jim and I and a wonderful team of people from all over the world did. We put the bad guys in jail. I mean, at the end of the day, the Blood Diamond story, part 2, is our story. And all the bad guys that seem to have won in the end of that movie, we put them in jail. So the good guys win in West Africa in this particular episode, a geopolitical episode.
David, I have a question. We haven't asked. A lot of questions I haven't asked. Well, we've been doing this roadshow now for a few days here.
If I nod off and fall asleep, let me just put me back up in the chair, all right?
So we talked about the fact you had 13 indictments.
Right.
The one you did not unseal at the time was Charles Taylor, who you just talked all about. For this crowd, I think they'd find interesting 2 things. One, what was the procedure of getting Charles Taylor actually served, the location, the timing, which was kind of a political decision by you, had ramifications of it. And the other question I haven't asked is, in this cabal of hierarchy of things, the top guy who seemed to be orchestrating everything was Muammar Gaddafi. Did you ever consider indicting him?
I did, and we had quite a bit of discussions, and Jim was in some of those, but when we first got there, I was just trying to decide who to indict, who wore the greatest responsibility, and really, there were 3 culpable, or as in the current situation with our president, they were subjects of an investigation. Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso, Charles Taylor, President of Liberia, President Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. And I took a close look, because at the end of the day, the West African Joint Criminal Enterprise was devised by Muammar Gaddafi. Blaise Compaoré assisted. Charles Taylor was closest right there, but they were all working at the same level. Started getting a lot of evidence on Charles Taylor, but it wasn't quite completely direct on particularly Muammar Gaddafi. And eventually I realized I wasn't going to be able to do that. But the real reason I didn't take down 3 heads of state at once, can you imagine this? The International Committee would have closed the court. They choked down the fact that I particularly the United States, indicting and taking down President Charles Taylor. It just isn't done, and the worst, diplomats hate change, right? I mean, in 5 minutes, I changed the geopolitical structure of West Africa. And that doesn't go well at the Foreign Commonwealth Office and the U.S. State Department, what have you. But when you're looking at this level, indicting big people who have done very bad things, you have to think, if I do that, what's the political, economic, diplomatic, practical reasons, the effect of that? The International Criminal Court has never gotten that and have made incredible mistakes, and their whole reputation is diminished. But I just sat through this, and I'm the one that had to make the ultimate decision on these guys. And I decided not to, because I just honestly felt that if I indicted 3 heads of state, they would have gone and withdrawn the funds of the tribunal, and we would have gone home. I mean, I honestly felt that the political blowback would have been such that we'd have never have gotten our work. And the reason why you think these things through this way, because why are you there is the reason you ask yourself. And the reason you ask yourself, we're here for seeking justice for the victim. We're here for the victims, not for us, not to make a splash, not to advance our careers, because all of us ended our careers to come to West Africa and left our families to come to West Africa to take a job that we had every reason to think we would fail. So that's really important, isn't it? And so you have to constantly remind yourself that we're here for the people of Sierra Leone who have suffered so greatly. And we're very arrogant at the international criminal level. This is white man's justice. We come in from the West into these places and we say we have all the answers. We get off our helicopters and step over the victims and keep moving on. We never look down and say, hey, what happened here? How you doing? What's going on? What do you think is the just result here? We didn't do that. We reached down and did just that, and walked the countryside, Jim and I and everybody, asking the people of Sierra Leone, what happened here? Tell us. I learned that in law school. Why don't you ask your client what happened? That seems like a given, but that doesn't happen. So we asked the people of Sierra Leone what happened. It helped me, and as I was drafting indictments, to understand who they thought did this. We were well within the shot pattern. About 80% of the people we thought we were building cases against, the people of Sierra Leone told us that that's who they thought it was too. So that was good. So they're getting, once the indictments went down, they said, wow, he was really listening to us. So that's really, really important. But we have to let them think this is their court. This is for and about them. And that's really, really critical. The other tribunals didn't do that. They did step over the victims, and they had a difficult time. It got better, but they had a difficult time because they didn't listen to the victims. But I was constantly reminding my wonderful group of team, we're here to get the victims, and I think they got that because again, as people arrive and they start seeing what happened, you can see that righteous fury building up in them about getting that justice done.
Your mandate, David, came from the United Nations, and you were independent
right.
of anybody else. And as part of the thinking process, and then you implemented the indictment, you unsealed the indictment against Charles Taylor. You actually served him while he was at a peace conference of other heads of state in West Africa, a peace conference which was sponsored to an extent, by the United States. And you go ahead and utterly embarrass one of the heads of state. What was the reaction of the State Department?
Step back just a hair. We executed Operation Justice and arrested everybody that I indicted, more or less, in about 55 minutes all across the region. There were a few that were still out there, but using the British Parachute Regiment, the Royal Navy, the Pakistani Special Forces, U.S. contract helicopters, Sierra Leone National Police. It was all a choreographed operation. So we had everybody pretty much controlled. By the time May came around, we had everybody that I had signed the indictments for, except two who were working with Charles Taylor, and Charles Taylor, who didn't know he had been indicted. We sealed that indictment because I didn't want Charles Taylor to start killing any witnesses and invading Sierra Leone to take over the special court with his army. So he didn't know, but we had a thing called Operation Rope, where we started to get into his head. Because what was going on here also, and this is again, this being geopolitically aware, what happened in March of 2003? We invaded Iraq, didn't we? And so the world walked away and watched the illegal invasion of Iraq and the subsequent horror story that started. But I had to get people I had to get the press to start turning around again. And so what I did is I began holding a series of press conferences saying that Charles Taylor was harboring indicted war criminals, Samuel Bakri and Johnny Paul Karoma, demanding that he turn them over. He is harboring war criminals. And at first it was silence. And finally I kept harping on it. Finally Charles Taylor took the bait and bit. And he said, I don't have them. Of course, I know he has them because I've got agents who are standing there looking at them. Because then I said, well, President Charles Taylor is wrong. I know where they are. Here's where they are. And the reason I know that is because I have agents who are in his government telling me that. I'm messing with his head, and he's now not sleeping very well. And I also know that within probably a month I'm going to unseal the indictment against him, but I have to get a theater watching. So he comes back again. He probably was quite blown away about this because I've got him because I actually know where they are. And he says, well, we'll go looking for them. I will certainly do my duty as president of Liberia and follow international law and stuff. So I know I got this guy. It's just a matter of how this plays out. So then I said, look, a week later I come back, pounding a table, demanding Charles Taylor hand over Johnny Paul Karoma and Samuel Bakri. 2 days later he comes back saying, well, we have found them. Samuel Bakri, known as the Mosquito because he loved to drink the blood of his victims, was killed before he was resisting arrest. But he was kind of quiet about Johnny Paul Karoma at first. So I said, where's Johnny Paul Karoma? And he never really kind of accounted for Johnny Paul Karoma. So I said, well, if Samuel Bakri is killed, then I want the body. Demanding the body. I want to see this. He's under indictment. The indictment's still there. I just haven't gone and withdrawn the indictment against either of those two guys. So on my birthday, May 29th, 2003, Charles Taylor sent me Samuel Bakri in a box. I remember the helicopter coming in, and he's in a cardboard box. And my investigative team seized the body and took him off to an autopsy, and we found that Charles Taylor had him shot before a firing squad. 5 individuals, 4 over the heart, and 1 guy pulled at a distance of 12 feet, angle 45 degrees. So they were kneeling. We also subsequently learned once Charles Taylor was taken down and put off to house arrest, our teams came in. We found that Charles Taylor had also had Samuel Bakri's wife, 3 children, and his mother-in-law murdered as well. And we never found the bodies, did we, Jim? We never found them.
Oh,
No, Samuel Bakri, his family. We knew that they'd been killed. but we never actually found where they had been murdered. Well, at this point in time, I've got the indictment. Operation Rope was then, the final part of it was to unseal the indictment at an appropriate time when Charles Taylor was outside of Liberia, exposed, and in front of a crowd of fellow heads of state. The Accra Peace Accord to stop a minor civil war going on in Liberia was put together by the president of Ghana, and that was set for 3 June. So that's when we decided I was going to unseal the indictment against him. So the day before, now remember, he just sent me the body of Sammy Blockery in a box. 2 days later, we assembled with the registrar. The plan was I sent a letter to the various presidents of these countries, the President of the United States, the President of Sierra Leone, the Prime Minister of Canada, obviously through, boy, this is not North Carolina where I live, I'm telling you. You know, I haven't seen this weather in a long, long time. But what we did is through their ambassadors, the U.S. ambassador, the British High Commissioner, the President of Sierra Leone was there. I sent a letter to them and the Secretary General of the United Nations saying that in the next 24 hours a significant national security event will take place. I am doing this as a matter of respect and courtesy, but please begin to take appropriate steps. I haven't told them what I'm doing, but I felt that I had to give people a heads up. The morning of the unsealing, the registrar, Robin Vincent, emailed and faxed to the Foreign Ministry of Ghana the indictment and arrest warrant of Charles Taylor, who is now flying to Ghana. So it's like, which they received because, you know, electronically, you know, they got it. We also served it personally, not me, but I had 2 of my special assistants go down and personally give it to the British or the Ghanaian High Commissioner, the ambassador of Ghana to Sierra Leone. So, you know, there's 2 ways to do that. And then I had called a press conference at the UN headquarters for 11 o'clock, which I knew that was when the peace accord was going to start. And it's one of these things where sometimes you're as lucky as you are good. The son of a gun pulls up at 11 o'clock in front of the Peace Palace and walks up the steps. At the same time, I am announcing to the world the indictment of President Charles Genki Arthur MacArthur Taylor for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And it's just echoing around the world. I am told by people now who are actually there, you know, special assistants are walking up to presidents of various African countries whispering in their ear. They're all looking at Charles Taylor, and Charles Taylor's looking around, and they trundle him off to a side room, tell him what's happened, tell him that he's going to have to leave Ghana, so they allow him to leave. And so 5 minutes later, he comes down the stage, goes up, President of Liberia, he comes down, an indicted war criminal. He gets back in his vehicle, heads back to the airport, flies back to Monrovia, and the Civil War continues. The United States enters West Africa for the first times ever. Marine Expeditionary Unit came in to stabilize the situation because the rebels against Charles Taylor now are emboldened because now he's an indicted war criminal, but he's still president of Liberia. And they begin to move on Monrovia, and people are dying by the dozens. So the United States brings in a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and they basically land on the beaches of Monrovia to protect the embassy and kind of show a force. 2 months later, Charles Taylor is stripped of his power. An interim president is sworn in. And as he stands at the base of the plane, as he's being trundled off to Calabar, Nigeria for house arrest, he turns to the crowd, looks directly into the mic to the world through the television camera, saying, "God willing, I'll be back." And I remember watching this on CNN and going, "Oh my God, that son of a gun is serious." And so off he goes and flies off. And he's under the protection. This just shows you how the good old boy club is. literally holding their arms around them are the presidents of Nigeria and the presidents of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, as if he's a wounded little child as they walk him up this Nigerian plane to take him off under house arrest. It's the symbolism, and I'm just gritting my teeth going, well, I got you. Well, again, he now is in house arrest, and of course he's howling from there. And he called me publicly while he was back in Monrovia after being indicted. He threw the race card. The only reason I indicted him is I'm white, he's black. He called me a redneck racist and that kind of stuff. That's fine. That's just the way it is. But what really surprised me, I was holding regular press conferences. There was a lot of demand for perspective and stuff. And I remember I was at the Freetown news area where there's where newspapermen go. I'd always go down there anyway once a month and hold a press conference. And I was standing there behind a podium, and some British BBC or Guardian or what have you. Mr. Crane, Thabo Mbeki this morning called you a minor bureaucrat. And I kind of looked at him. You have to be a little theatrical to be a chief prosecutor. So I'm looking at him, make it look like I'm embarrassed or something like that. And I pound the podium. I said, I am not a minor bureaucrat. They're all kind of, I go, I'm a major bureaucrat. Well, you know what that does? It's just all of a sudden we have professional newsmen here. That's not a story anymore. The story is the funny joke, not the insult. And so it just went away. But anyway, those. And so Charles Taylor is trundled off and he stays there this is August of 2003, and we actually don't get him until March of 2006. He was accounted for, causing a lot of problems. And what eventually did, he basically cooked his own goose. For the remainder of time that I am in Sierra Leone as chief prosecutor, I spent 70% of my time building a political platform by which the world then would hand over Charles Taylor to the special court. And that was all in place when I left the court in July of 2005 after having been there 36 months. He was handed over to the court 6 months later. It's a special moment, and Jim can regale you and maybe in another program how that went down. But what I did, since I was no longer in office anymore, I was giving a speech at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. Is it New London or London? London, yeah, London, Ontario. And we knew that Charles Taylor had been accounted for and was coming back to the special court for Sierra Leone. There's a detailed, whole fascinating thing about that. We can talk about it if you want. Jim can do it better than I can. But the point is that I knew he was going to be handed over to the special court that day. In fact, because of time difference, like right during the time I'm giving a university lecture before about 500 students and faculty at the University of Western Ontario. So I'm introduced and I get up in front of the podium. It's a beautiful venue, and like Hall of Philosophy and stuff, this nice place, and they're treating me very well. And it's March 6th of 2006. And thank you very much. I said, I have to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, in those days, even as though we had we didn't have iPhones in 2006. I had a flip phone in a pouch, but I had a flip phone. So rudimentary in those days. I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced cheese, but the bottom line is it was, you couldn't do this stuff very well. You could maybe hit contacts and squint and go, yeah. And so I'm sitting there, ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, Charles Taylor is on his way to be handed over to the special court for Sierra Leone. And I've asked my special assistant in Sierra Leone to call me when the helicopter lands in the compound. It may happen while I am giving this speech, literally. And I have to take the call, so would you bear with me? Everybody kind of titters, and so I give my speech, and there's no phone call. Not only I'm aware of that little flip phone on my hip not going off, but so are they now. And I give my speech, and yeah, thank you very much, kind of thing, and I'm kind of twitching a little bit, and the moderator says, now Mr. Crane will take question and answers and stuff. As soon as she says that, the phone goes bzzz, bzzz. I have to take the phone call and say, 400 people leaning forward. So, take it out. And it's Harpenter Otwell, my former special assistant, and I, hello? And she's crying. She goes, Mr. Crane, I am looking at the helicopter land in our compound and watching him come out. I said, thank you. This is a great day for all of us. Of course, I'm being a little theatrical, so I put it back. People are, some are drooling. I said, ladies and gentlemen, former President Charles Taylor is now in the custody of the special court and will be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity before a fair and open trial. 400 people stood up and clapped for 5 minutes. I clapped too, but it was just a very special moment for all of us. The special court for Sierra Leone is kind of in a bowl. There's high ground all around it, and of course there's houses. When Harpenter was calling, I could hear cheering in the background, and people standing on rooftops on the side of hills by the thousands were cheering when that helicopter landed. And really, these are the small things. This is why we do it for the victims, because the victims are standing there of what this monster did, watching him walk off the airplane in he had a bulletproof vest, but he was doing the perp walk. And Jim Johnson was literally probably 2 feet from him when he came off that helicopter, because there was a legal transfer. We had to do a little ritual, but then he was trundled off. And did you put him in an orange jumpsuit, Jimmy?
Not right away.
Yeah.
Actually, were they orange or blue?
Actually, I don't care, really. It's like he was put in a prison suit. And when we arrested everybody in Operation Justice back in 2003, we flew them to a secret detention facility that we had put together southwest of Freetown in the island of Bonth. And Jim was there also. I mean, Jim is like Forrest Gump. He's everywhere. But the point is that when you hand, you're wearing civilian clothes, but when you hand somebody a prison uniform, that's a sobering moment. That's the transition from civilian to detainee and then eventually prisoner. And this is the beginning of their journey for many, 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 many years into the punitive system, so to speak, after a fair and open trial.
So David, at that point, you had left the tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving speeches. You're a rock star, but away from the tribunal. You'd seen Charles Taylor on TV, on CNN, but you had never eyeballed him at all.
Yeah, we've never met.
You'd never met, and he had never met you until one moment. So why don't you describe that moment?
Well, again, I'm back in normal life. I'm kind of used to now the running water and the flush toilets, and I'm mopping my mouth while I'm showering, and I've gained, when I came home from Sierra Leone, I'm 6'3". I weighed 155 pounds. And so I'm now 175 pounds, and life is good. I'm getting used to real food, etc. And so I'm teaching at Utrecht University in the summers. Great place if you've ever been to Utrecht or that part, and I'm 5 weeks course. And my wife came over to visit me, and I knew that Charles Taylor trial was going on in The Hague, because what had happened was we tried all our cases in Freetown in front of the people. But the presidents of Sierra Leone and Liberia requested to the president of the court that Charles Taylor's trial be somewhere else, just because of the political issues and security issues. So he was moved to and tried in The Hague. The Special Court for Sierra Leone rented trial space from the International Criminal Court, and then eventually the Special Tribunal for Lebanon up in The Hague. So I said, let's go see the Charles Taylor trial. And so I contacted the special court team that is actually in The Hague. It kind of, at this point now, the trials are largely finished, well, they're done in Sierra Leone, so it was kind of a split. Jim was down in Sierra Leone kind of wrapping up those trials and doing the things that you have to do, appeals and all of that stuff, while Brenda Hollis, the then chief prosecutor, moved to The Hague so that they could prosecute Charles Taylor for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So that's going on, and so we take the train over, and they're all pleased to see. I haven't seen some of these people in a while. These are all friends. Binta Mansoray, the registrar, and so she personally escorts Judy and I up to the courtroom, and I believe it was in the ICC at this time, and it's a very nice, but it's a huge courtroom, and the visitors gallery is, you can put 200 people in there. There's rows, but you come in from the upper, as you're looking at it, you come in from the upper left, and that's the only door. But there's this big bulletproof glass between the visitors gallery and the courtroom itself. There's nobody in the courtroom. I mean, I have to tell you, this isn't, these are normal criminal trials that take time, and there's some sensationalism at the beginning in the opening statement, and there is the closing statement, and maybe a witness or two. There's nobody in the visitors gallery, this 200-person visitors gallery. So, and it's either a motion or a mundane witness kind of thing. So it's Friday morning, it's about 11 o'clock, the court closes it at about 12:30, and it won't open until Monday. So we just wanted to go in and just see. But I also wanted to see Charles Taylor, who I've never seen, and he's never seen me. We know each other very well. He'd put a contract out on me years earlier. And so we walk in, and so the tribunal, the judges, who I know, are just sitting there, and there's movement in the visitors gallery. So just naturally, like any of us would, they just look up, like what's going on, and they recognize me. They don't know my wife, but they recognize me. So the judges kind of look up, and one of them kind of did a semi-smile, and I nodded respectfully, and then the prosecutors notice the judges are looking up, so they all go like that, and there's Mohammed Ben-Gur, all these people that I had hired, and all these wonderful, great people. So everybody's, well, look, that's David Crane. They didn't do that, but you could tell they're kind of thinking that, and they're kind of looking. Some of them smiled. Nobody waved. I mean, their court's in session. And, the clerks are looking up and stuff, but nobody in the defense team is really looking. They were looking down at their monitors. So Charles Taylor is all the way in the corner where the court is set up. He's all the way on the other side of the door. So Judy and I walk down 20 rows, go to the first row, turn left, walk all the way down to the end, and I sat. Charles Taylor is there, plate glass, and I'm sitting right next to him. I did it intentionally. And it was, at first he didn't realize it was me. He's obviously absorbed and didn't pick up on what was going on. And so my wife is here and I'm here. So I'm looking at the tribunal, and they're all looking at me, and I kind of go like this to kind of like, come on. I mean, I'm allowed to be here. And I look over to my wife, and my wife is giving Charles Taylor the stink eye. She's just staring at him. I said, come on, sweetie. So she leans back, and they continue, and then all of a sudden Charles Taylor looks over, and he and I look each other just dead in the eye. And it's just like instant recognition. I know he was, but he just realized that's the redneck racist. That's, as he called me in his pre-sentencing statement that he could make, the attack dog of George Bush. And then he said something bad about Jimmy Johnson too, and others. But the point is that here I am looking at this guy finally, my old nemesis, and I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, and then turned away and looked at him, and we were there for about 15 minutes, and then got up and left. So that's my one and only. Well, no, actually not. Then I was honored to be invited back during his sentencing and his appeal. So I sat in the gallery when he was sentenced, but then when they then, of course, he appealed, and then the appellate chamber came to give their opinion related to his conviction of aiding and abetting the destruction of over 1 million human beings. And and it was very nice, and I appreciate what Brenda did, and they allowed me to robe up and actually sit in the courtroom again. And I was sitting in the front row next to Jim and Brenda Hollis, the current and last chief prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, while they read the appeals judgment, and just destroyed him. And it was a great moment. Then he was looking at us, because he was, the way it's configured, the prosecution's looking at the defense, and the defense is looking this way, and he's looking at the judges, and to see him, all four of them, barely over the podium, being kind of a little Napoleonic little figure as well, and just like a little peacock strutting around. He never admitted his crimes. He never had any remorse. He denied everything that he did. And he just stood there and took it, and they sentenced him to 50 years in prison. And you're thinking, what? I thought they'd take him out and hang him. Well, there is no death penalty at the international level at all. So that's off the table. And normally, it's not like when you get 50 years in New York State, you may serve a half of it or whatever, and maybe get some kind of other thing. But normally and mostly in the international system, it's hard time. It's 50 is 50. You can petition after a period of 2/3 to get out. It's up to the trial to let you out. But usually 50 is 50. And he was 64 at the time, so add the 50 and it's a life sentence. And they did that. It's not perfect, and I'm not defending it. International sentencing is really too low. I mean, if I convict you for aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity to destroy the destruction of over 1.2 million human beings, you'd think that they would have an ability to life without parole, whatever. Of course, there is no parole, so it's not the way we think it. We had some people convicted who committed horrendous crimes and got 15 years. I don't know how they do that. Fortunately, the prosecutor can actually appeal a sentence. And a couple, we were actually successful. Who was it that we got
Fofana and Conduit.
Yeah, they got
2.5 times to their sentence.
Yeah. So you can do that and that's the appellate chamber, so that the trial chamber, for whatever reason, give them 15, they get X number of years after that. And that's fine with me. Because again, most of these people, if you convict them of international crimes, there should in some ways be a minimum sentencing, at least 50 or at least 45. But they arranged from 15 to 52 years. And so Charles Taylor now was trundled off to Her Majesty's maximum security prison in, I think, the northeast of England, in a godforsaken place. It's like this. Yeah, it's even worse than Western New York. The sun never shines. It's always cold. And anyway, so he gets up every morning in this cold, bleak, damp place by himself. He is not with the general population. The international system builds him or puts him there. They put him in the prison, but we build a little thing for him, so he's got a little space for sleeping and probably a little kitchenette so he can cook his cultural food, and he's got a television and stuff. But he's alone. And he's allowed to walk around some space outside by himself, but he's alone. But every morning he gets up, as he's shaving, he realizes the people of Sierra Leone won, and that's a good thing.
David, last question of our entire book tour. I have introduced you many times in the last few days, always talking about the genealogy of Robert Jackson, Nuremberg trial, David Crane, Sierra Leone Tribunal, the second American and the only at this point. What does Robert Jackson mean to you? Did that have an impact as you were preparing your opening statement, as you were preparing the trial? Was there the sort of the ghost of Robert Jackson in any of your thinking?
Oh yeah, I mean it's interesting. Robert Jackson was more in my life before I actually knew it, or I began to look and reflect back. My father-in-law graduated from Syracuse University, class of 1943. You know where this is going. He was an ROTC, and he went across the stage, got his diploma from a guy named Robert H. Jackson, walked across the stage, left Syracuse University, and landed on the beach of Normandy and walked across Europe until he bumped into the Soviet Union in Austria. While his brother, older brother, was flying as a waist gunner in a B-17 over Germany, 35 missions. He was in Jimmy Stewart's squadron. They had about a 10% chance to come home. They came home without a scratch. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's just amazing. So there's that kind of connection. Syracuse University law school used to be downtown Syracuse. In fact, my father told me he helped build it. He was a bricklayer while he was at Syracuse. But they decided to move it onto campus, on the hill. It's more of on a hill if you've ever seen SU. And so they built E.I. White Hall. And this was in 1954. And then Justice Robert Jackson, he came back from Nuremberg, and he was now an associate justice still. Many think that because he went to Nuremberg, he was no longer considered, and because the way some of his fellow justices felt about the kangaroo court at Nuremberg, it cost him the chief justice job. In fact, there was even talk of him being president someday, but going to Nuremberg to seek justice for the people of Europe cost him his career. But he came back as a chief justice or associate justice, and Robert Jackson was supposed to give the cut the ribbon and then give a speech. He died a week before that, and so they took his speech and it was read posthumously on his behalf. And so when I received an award from the law school back in 2005, after I'd come back from West Africa, I read his speech again, and it was really quite moving. So the ghost of Robert Jackson is always through all of us, and it'll be seen in the book, The Founders, Michael Scharf, Case Western Reserve, University School of Law. I asked him because there's actually 5 of us that have founded a tribunal. There's myself, Luis Marino Campo, Robert Berti, Richard Goldstone, but then there's Robert H. Jackson. And so I asked in the book for him to write a chapter about Robert H. Jackson from the point of view of Robert H. Jackson. Robert H. Jackson didn't write anything about what he did. I mean, he gave some speeches and stuff like that, but he never wrote a book about what he did in Nuremberg. That was written by many others who were there, or subsequent historians, what have you. So Michael did a great job of kind of being that 5th founder. Tip a hat to the great man. So that's kind of cool. And so, but again, there's more to Robert Jackson, and that is when I was getting ready to write my opening statement. The greatest legal speech ever given is the opening statement by Robert H. Jackson at Nuremberg, which I do not hold myself out to be any close, but I reread Telford Taylor's Judgment at Nuremberg, and then I closely read the chapter around the opening statement. It took me about 3 weeks to write the statement in my own way. But as you know, it is a humbling thing. Think this through. I'm sitting in the court. This is the opening of the trials in June of 2004. And I'm sitting there with the team, and Jim Johnson is with me right at the table, and we're in our robes. In at the international level, in the modern era, we wear black robes with white charbot, and you'll see pictures of me, and it's right on the. And that's just what we do. Now, in tropical West Africa, that's not fun. And I've heard, though I can either confirm or deny, that some of the members of my team would wear T-shirts and shorts under those robes. don't know that for a fact, but I'll just leave it at that. I never made a big deal of it. But it is sitting there at the table. The podium is right there. Defendants, the people of Sierra Leone behind you with the world's press. Tribunal walks in and they got prettier robes than we do. Theirs are red. Now I have one too. I have a ceremonial robe as well. But I was wearing my working robes because we're going to work. And they walk in, they sit down, the presiding judge looks over, he makes a statement about why we're here and all of that. Then he looks over at you and he goes, Mr. Prosecutor, your opening statement. And so when I got up, you know, and my opening statement's already at the podium, and I got up and was walking to that podium, the ghost of tens of thousands of deceased are with me, but I tended to think that Robert Jackson was standing next to me, because this is the next step forward that he started a long time ago in Chautauqua County in Western New York. So it was special. Yeah, he was very much part of that. So that's my Jackson story, and I'm sticking to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Crane.
Thank you.